Writer and broadcaster Stuart Cosgrove recently won the 2018 Penderyn Music Book Prize for the second book in his epoch trilogy about soul music and social change in 3 American cities during crucial years. Memphis 68, The Tragedy of Southern Soul was announced as the winner at the Laugharne Weekend Festival Detroit. 67, the first in the series, published in 2015, set the tone for the books. Harlem 69, the third, will be launched in October 2018. Cosgrove was a fanzine writer on the northern soul scene before joining music paper Echoes as a staff writer. He then became media editor with the NME and a feature writer for a range of newspapers and magazines. He graduated in drama and English from the University of Hull and has studied at George Mason University, Harvard's John F. Kennedy School of Government and Wharton Business School. He has a PhD in media and a doctorate in English and American Studies. Locally, he is best known as the co-host of BBC Radio Scotland's popular comedy Football Phone in Off the Ball, which he presents twice a week with Tim Cowan, and as the co-host of BBC Scotland's Saturday Football Sports Scene Results show. He lives in Dennistoun. Cosgrove is currently writing the Glasgow bid to be the new headquarters of Channel 4. He worked for the station for 8 years. We called him for a chat about books and cities, music and media. Did you have a very clear idea of where you were going with the books? Did you have it all mapped out? To some extent, books 1 and 2 always had an inevitability about them. Because 1967 in Detroit was a really critical year for the city, for its long-term history, the rebellions or the riots of the July period impact that they had on the city and its future. That's where it would start. Motown was at its height, it was beginning to thrive, gain traction. So, there was a sense about it feeling completely real. And then, with events in Memphis, 1968, in particular the assassination of Martin Luther King, but also the death of Otis Redding and the aftermath of that. That meant that that city was very much in the public imagination, and that felt right as well. Then, I had a big debate in my mind. I was asking friends on the soul scene and that. There was a rally for me doing Philadelphia, but the Philly sound doesn't really materialize until the 70s. I wanted to look at Harlem. I wanted to continue a theme that started in Detroit and then was very visible in Memphis. And that was about what happened to Black Power and the FBI's war and the Black Panthers and all of that stuff. There was a big show trial in 1969 in Harlem when the local branch of the Black Panthers were arrested by an undercover unit of the New York police. The trial and the information and the stories around it, they were just very compelling. Of course, I was also aware that in Harlem there were a number of indie labels that were beginning to emerge. Labels that were inventing the future. A lot of things were happening. Jazz folk was being imagined, the early days of disco, street funk, psychedelic soul. And then, on from there, hip-hop, inevitably, and house music. I wanted the final book to not just end the 60s, which it had to do, but also point things forward to the future of soul music. It's called Harlem 69, The Future of Soul. It argues that here, in this city within a city, in Harlem in New York, you could find the grassroots of every form of black music since 1960s soul. The seeds are already planted. The other big thing about Harlem at that time, it became infamous around the world for a huge heroin pandemic. One of the owners of one of the big indie label, a guy called Fat Jack Taylor, he owned a company called Rojack Records. He was one of the area's most notorious heroin dealers. So, it had a central character that could take you through some of those stories that were soul-related, that were community-related, and also touched on heroin abuse and all of that as well. Was there a balance to be struck, then, between political history, social commentary, and writing for music fans? You know what, striking that balance was probably the most delicate thing of all. Oddly enough, I submitted the manuscript of Harlem to the publishers last week. The hardback will come out in October. My editor came back to me and said one of the chapters early in the book about a sax organist is too dense with information and slightly too long. Notes like that make you think, well, wait a minute, I don't have to mention every single record that this sax player has ever produced in his unbelievably rich career. We have to stick with the spine of the story. Sometimes I have taken out chunks because I realized I was going on a detour to suit real hardcore fans of the Northern Soul label scene. Maybe I'm showing off a bit. I am a PhD historian in the sense that my PhD is in American history and things like that. So there is a natural tendency think I can actually conclude this chapter by telling you what was going on in the mind of Richard Nixon. Then you end up getting distracted to the White House, away from Harlem, towards political history, and you lose your radar on the main thing. Interestingly enough, there is a perfect resolution. The central character of all three books, it's not the singers, it's the city. Do you see them as three quite separate books, or are there strands of stories that run through the trilogy? The central, driving theme is what happened to soul music and what happened to the African American experience is expressed through that music. It doesn't matter what book you start with, they do stand alone, but if you read them together there is an overall narrative. Characters recur across all of them. The Black Panthers, Motown, Berry Gordy, Stax Records. This was a period when they were most visible. You had a level of knowledge and interest before you started on the books. Were there surprises along the way as you did your research? There were surprises that you wouldn't imagine. Let me just take, for example, the character that I mentioned, Fat Jack Taylor. Fat Jack Taylor was a heroin dealer, right? And he owned an indie label that effectively became grounded in street soul music but always struggled to get national distribution. It only had a small number of hits. Begin thinking about that man's life and you immediately think, heroin dealer, scumbag. How do I write about this guy in a way that the reader can identify with? The more I dug into his life, the more I realized that he often helped revitalize the career of spent, kind of, older female singers. Pearl May Bailey, Esther Phillips, Etta James, people like that, who were not all of them heroin addicts. It was a curious thing where he was both the dealer and the father figure in an odd way. But he was also someone that had a remarkable ability to spot new talent. He developed a number of young singers or performers, and helped them, largely subsidized their career. They were not, as it were, emboldened youth. They were hugely self-confident young men. They were not there to be exploited. For me, the process of discover was finding that stories were often multi-layered. I've got detailed research with original documentation, looking into the backstory of the city. Understanding coincidences, who lived where, what school people went to. The books have been years in the making. With the Channel 4 bid, the announcement has been made and there's been a chance for people to voice their opinion. What happens now to secure this investment in our city? An opportunity has arisen, largely for a mixture of circumstance and the fact that senior management teams at Channel 4 have woken up to the political pressures at Channel 4. It has long been at risk of being privatized, probably for about the last 5 or 6 years. One of the solutions to that was to say, well, if you don't want to be privatized, why are you sitting in the most expensive, trendy office building in London, where 1,000 of your staff stay and you seem only to be doing some things out in the cities out with London? You need to do more. So, that was the deal. If you want to resist privatization, be more public service. And public service isn't just about the shows you make, it's where you make them. It's who you employ. The new management went with that and put forward this idea that half their staff would stay in London and another half would either relocate or they would hire new staff in a range of different cities. They've offered the prospect of what they call an alternative national HQ. That would be, not in London obviously, self-evidently. And then, 2, what they call, creative hubs. And these hubs would maybe have 50 to 100 people at them. But those creative hubs would also have commissioning departments. Whether that was in drama or factual or children's, educational. So, there is a whole section of things there that are up for offer. Clearly, Glasgow is one of the leading creative cities across the UK. Along with Manchester and Bristol, and other places, we are keen to bid for those things. That's really we are just pulling together right now, the big offering, the bid documentation. So, it's not like filling in an application form, you are making a wider case. Correct, you've got to bring together the city's story. For example, I've been working on the digital media pages of what will be the bid documentation. The design bid that will go over to Channel 4. It shows they can work with games companies, app developers, social media companies. We are putting together a story of value, particularly for these hubs. Channel 4 want them to be in places where there's already a thriving independent production sector and a freelance sector. Glasgow's probably got the biggest outside of London. Do you think that people will actually be surprised when they realize the scale and the breadth and the depth of what is happening in the city already? This document will connect up all the dots. There's so many unknowns though. For instance, if they put the national headquarters in, let's just say they put the building in Leeds, then there's considerably more pressure on them to place some of the creative hubs away from England because it's an all-UK bid process. It's Channel 4, for all of the UK. Then there could be a situation where Glasgow is in the ring with Cardiff. So, each decision influences the next one. There's all sorts of strengths to Glasgow. There's weaknesses as well. We're not naive about that. But there's a hell of a lot more strengths than there are weaknesses. Already you can see that people will project things onto this conversation, about the nature of the union, the state of the city, about modern media. Presumably, your razor focus has to be on this bid document and presenting the case for Glasgow. Well, we may even get asked about those things when we go into the pitch meetings. We will put forth a pitch document and then go through a series of meetings, and actually quite often there's also a site visit. They may come up for a short visit. That process will happen all through the summer into the autumn, even though the bid documents are submitted in late May. Let's say that you take the State of the Union one, which of course comes up. And actually, comes up across a whole set of sectors, not just television. You can say, the only prism through which you can see this is the prospect of seeing an independent country. I'm not on social media, so I'm not talking about specific people. I know the question has been raised, why would an English company want to put their headquarters or a major department in a foreign country? Well, firstly, Channel 4 is not an English company. It's a statutory corporation, currently an asset of the whole of Britain. This is what this project is about. So, it is not an English company. It locates staff in Scotland, it already has. I've actually been one of their senior managers in Scotland over the years. It's surprising people didn't know about that. Also, it's a very narrow understanding of the situation. Why, if Channel 4 felt like that, do they have an office and an entire advertising business in Ireland, based in Dublin? Why would they do that, but not in an independent Scotland? That just doesn't make sense. Further thing that doesn't make sense is, do you know any business in the world, that says, oh, you know what? We're in a bit of a huff because of this referendum. So, what we're gonna do is, cut off our nose to spite our face and turn our back on 10% of our market share. Since when has that made any business sense? The millions of people that watch Channel 4 in Scotland are consumers that the advertising companies and brands want to reach them. If Unilever you want to sell dishwasher tablets to households in Scotland through television advertising, then Channel 4 is one of the effective ways of doing that. They're not going to close that down. That's just not even a credible scenario. So the people that make that claim, they spend way too much time only thinking one-dimensionally about the constitutional situation and about the way that business functions as well. Are you buoyed by the fact that creative industries already choose Glasgow? They don't feel the need to go to London to be a success? I'm not only buoyed by that, I'm a lifetime kind of advocate of that. It's something I'm personally proud of. I love hearing those stories, whether it's the folk from Rockstar North making the next Grand Theft Auto, or a Scottish guitar band playing at South by Southwest and going on an American tour, or setting up their own record company and setting their own agenda. People who are working on web delivery or self-publishing and digital media. That's completely to the advantage of Scotland. In the end, I'm sure there will be other cities that feel they've got strong stories to tell in terms of creative excellence. Of course there will be competition. But hey, you've got to be in it to win it.